Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. With me tonight, as always, is Mr. Drew Crawley. Drew, welcome, sir. How are you?
Howdy, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm quite excellent. Thank you very much. We
Glad to
have a
hear it.
couple of guests with us. We'll get them introduced in a second, and we have a really fun show. We're talking about Dark Side of the Moon, the epic Pink Floyd album. It is 50 years old this month. So we'll be talking about that and we'll be drinking some whiskey along the way. So before we do that, we want to tell you about Bar Cart Co-op. And better than me telling everybody, talking about everybody else's show, we've got we've got a plurality of votes here for we've got a quorum for Bar Cart. So Mike, tell us about My Whiskey Den and when folks can see it.
All right, My Whiskey Den, which is most often live on Monday nights, 8 p.m. Central. We delve into craft whiskey, predominantly American craft whiskey, and love to interview the people making craft whiskey with alternative grains. I guess what would be a good way to say it? Not the big boys. But yeah, we do a lot of interviews and we've done some blind samples and good exploration of things that you might not be able to get. And we also do try to help you find those things.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other side of that show, the famous show, which was on Alan Bishop Day, I believe 2021, where Malort was paired with a McRib. The other side of that show was the namesake for Alan Bishop Day, Mr. Alan Bishop, the alchemist of the Black Forest of Indiana. I'm still trying to get that right. I think I nailed it that time, Alan. Is that good?
Yeah, you're supposed to do the radio voice when you do it, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The alchemist of the Black Forest of Indiana.
I'm not going to do it. It's
All right.
not happening. It's not happening. So, yeah. What's up, guys? Glad to be here again. So, yeah. What I am I supposed to introduce my shows?
Yeah, tell us about your shows.
Okay. Gotcha. So
I can't keep up with all of them. There's like a new one every other week, I think.
I can't either. I haven't introduced any new ones yet, but it's it's coming. I've got all the podcasting equipment. Why wouldn't I do it?
Right.
There's got to be more stuff. So you can find me on Distillers Talk with Christy Atkinson, where we talk to distillers of either the professional ilk or home distilling or moonshining ilk as well, and get really geeky about distillation. Or you can find me via If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, which is sort of our high strangeness / paranormal / somewhat historical show that I started doing with my wife here in the past year or so. We're finishing up season 2 now. Actually, I've got one more episode for season 2, and I'm going to take a little extended break and really work hard on season 3. And then you can also check out the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, where I answer questions about distillation from both professional distillers and home distillers on YouTube at the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute.
Yeah. So it keeps you very, very busy.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's getting easier though to do like the I really struggled with If You Have Ghosts when I started that deal, and it's getting easier now to do that because I kind of understand how to do the editing and all that stuff. So it's not as bad as it was, but just coming up with material and getting people to come on and interview them, is the difficulty.
Yeah.
So, but
yeah. Well, good. Well, appreciate you guys being with us. I know, I guess it was a few weeks ago, there was some conversation in a chat going back and forth about Sid Barrett, and you guys were both digging pretty deep into Pink Floyd. So when we had this show on our schedule, I thought, well, why not get some of our Bar Cart brothers on here and have them talk about it with us as well. So the topic of the day is this album, Dark Side of the Moon. And I have, hang on, let's get this right, a Pink Floyd t-shirt.
that's awesome.
So I'm ready. But before we dig into the album and Pink Floyd, we're all drinking something tonight that we thought would pair well with the dark side of the moon. So, Drew, start with you. What do you have?
So I decided to forgo drinking, and I took 3 grams of mushrooms and just finished the Wizard of Oz film. And no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So I'm actually drinking something kind of special. I didn't do that. I'm actually drinking the very last bit of the Right Way single barrel from Spirits of French Lick, which is an absinthe finished rye whiskey. It was as close as I had to an absinthe tonight, but I figured, some kind of psychedelic effect spirit was appropriate for the theme of the evening. So this is literally the last about 3/4 ounce that I had in my bottle. So decided to finish that off tonight.
Very cool and much appreciated, man. Yeah, there's another barrel of that coming very shortly, by the way. So,
Alan, what are you drinking?
So, much like Drew, I actually started off with trying to go down the Sid Barrett rabbit hole, and I just took Quaaludes and melted them and tried to rub them into my non-existent hair. I think it's starting to set in. So tonight I've got some Glenmorangie, A Tale of Winter. This is actually my buddy Justin Whaley's bottle that he left here, but I was thinking about I think Dark Side of the Moon. So I'll be perfectly honest with anybody listening, watching, whatever. I love Pink Floyd, mostly Sid Barrett era, and then up to metal in particular. Like, I love that album. And once you get the Dark Side of the Moon and forward, like, there's stuff that I really like, but to me that almost becomes like it's kind of my dad's version of Pink Floyd, right? It's a little more commercially open, etc. But I will say this: Dark Side of the Moon was probably the first album that I remember hearing and putting on headphones and listening to and understanding what the production value of it was and the complexities that went into it, how well made it was compared to other albums that were released in 1973 and in that general era. A lot of times those albums sound like somebody literally just dropped a microphone down at floor level and started recording the band in the studio, and there's a place for that. But Dark Side of the Moon is not that. It's very much a very well produced, very well thought out album, and it changed the way that Pink Floyd operated from that moment forward. So going into this Glenmorangie, A Tale of Winter, this is one of their limited editions that they do. It is a very complex drink. It's a very sort of, and I don't use the word smooth often. I even ranted about that one point in time. This is one of those that, like, you could put in front of anybody in the world and they could drink this, and that's the descriptor they would use. It's smooth. It's got production value to it, right? You can pick up the notes, but there's nothing that's out of balance and nothing that's off, and it's very accessible to everyone. Much like Dark Side of the Moon. So that's what I've got tonight.
Yeah, good choice. What about you, Mike?
Well, I didn't do any mushrooms, but I did crush up some Benadryl and melted some old milk cartons and tried to huff those in an old paper bag. And I'm not wearing
metal
pants.
as fuck.
So now I've actually got, what I wanted to drink was some milk and honey Israeli whiskey in honor of Roger Waters, but Instead, I do have. I went the Scotch route because I felt it was more appropriate with them. But I thought it's got to be something with flavor explosions, higher proof flavor explosions, seeing flavors as colors. So I went through and got this Edredauer. That's a 9-year-old Edredauer cast strength, entirely aged in sherry butt for the entire 9 years, and it is a massive flavor bomb and makes me see colors.
Nice. Well, I have Fascination Street.
Nice.
It is an absinthe. What'd you finish this in?
It was in a New American
Oak. Yeah, absinthe and New American Oak. It's actually, if you can see this, it's bottle number 40, which means it doesn't technically exist. So I thought that that was a great way to, dive into Dark Side of the Moon. So
there's a lot of bullshit on that bottle. It's also amethyst filtered, just to be clear.
It is.
What did it do for it? I don't know.
Single barrel amethyst filtered. Yep. All right. Good deal. Love it. So, hey, gentlemen, thank you for being here. Love you guys. Let's say cheers. Good show.
Cheers. Justin's going to come back and check that bottle and be like, "What the fuck did you do?"
That's a rookie mistake on his part. Really,
that's what you get for leaving it in my house. I'm just saying.
It's his fault.
Yep.
What do you think you're going to do with it? I thought it was a gift.
Right. It also, to be fair, Fat Kid tasting note, it tastes a little bit like gummy bears.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh,
Truthfully.
Okay. Very good. All right. So we've kind of covered a lot of the mid-show commercial kind of stuff with everybody plugging their show. I will say this: I've got a copy of this book, and you're coming out with another one, right? Is that what I heard? Is that the rumor I heard? In addition to everything else that you have going on, you had time to write another book.
Oh, it's more like a pamphlet. It's like 54 pages,
Pamphlet.
But yes, there's
Okay.
there's another publication coming. So for sure. And that's the goal, is to release, like, I don't know, maybe one of those every couple years or something. Cause I actually wrote that one in like 2017. So,
Okay. Is there a manifesto coming?
well, that manifesto's been done for a while, buddy. You'll know when I'm done. When I've won the lottery, you'll see that fucking thing hit Facebook and you'll never hear from me again. It's literally it's just a list of fuck you is what it is. It's up to 892 now.
892. Well, okay. That's a number. It's a number.
Mostly people, but also concepts.
Almost as high a number as the number of weeks that Dark Side of the Moon has charted. So there's a segue for you.
Yeah.
That number is 972 apparently. But anyway,
impressive.
It is impressive. Dark Side of the Moon came up. Was released, like I said, in March of '73. It was the 8th Pink Floyd album, and what was it? Maybe the second or third without Sid. I don't remember.
It'd be more than that. It'd probably be closer to 5, I think, because there were several. There were several in there in between. There was Saucerful of Secrets. There was a couple of soundtrack things. There was Obscured by Clouds.
Yeah.
Metal, etc. So probably 4 or 5. Umagama, however you say that shit. Yeah.
Guma. Yeah. Adam Hartmother.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll dig into Sid a little bit too, because that plays a lot into the content of this album. So
8th studio album, by the way.
8th studio album. Yes, it is.
Yep.
Anybody remember have a distinct memory of the first time you listened to the album?
No, for me, of course, I wasn't alive whenever it was released, but so it was always I guess a part of the cultural context of growing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was always around, and it was something that my dad listened to a ton. And of course, to this day, a great many of those songs are still, played on popular radio, various places. So it's always been something there to me that's just been a part of life.
Yeah, mine's probably pretty similar. I'm sure I was at some party in high school, something or another, either watching Wizard of Oz or just sitting in a field, general debauchery ensuing. But it's definitely kind of part of the zeitgeist. I heard 3 or 4 of the tracks throughout life, but I don't really remember ever actually sitting down and listening to the full record, probably until the last year or two.
Yeah. I don't have a memory of the first time, just because for me, I came to Floyd late. Of course, this album I was 3 when this album came out, so clearly I was not listening to it. But the radio stations growing up ruined so much music. Ruined Led Zeppelin, ruined a lot, because Led Zeppelin only put out 2 songs. Pink Floyd had 1, and that's what they played all the time. And I kind of rebelled against it and just I didn't like it. So, but I remember the first time I actually heard it was actually another radio station that had come back from the dead. It was alive in the 70s, came back from the dead, and they would do things like play an entire album on Friday at lunch. Or all night long they would play albums, and they would play anything. People would call in and say, would you play whatever album, and they would play it. And they would play any kind of music behind any kind of music. And that was the first time I remember hearing it. And it was during the day at work. It's like, okay, there's more to it than money,
right?
Right. But
yeah. I was 6 when it came out, and we did not listen to it. We did not dropped the needle on this in Mrs. Smith's first grade class. So, but yeah, it was just kind of it was there. It was part of everything music. And when I kind of started making or claiming certain music as, okay, this is my music, this is what I choose to listen to. I was very much a classic rock youth, and this was just there. It was just there, part of it. And it's not like today where, oh yeah, I heard that single, and so now I can go and easily access the entire album and listen to the whole thing. You couldn't do that back then. Somebody had to own the album. You had to own the album, or it was some sort of special deal like you were talking about, Mike, where the radio station just chose to play the whole thing. So I was probably in high school before I heard the whole thing beginning to end.
The crazy thing too, so you mentioned, the single thing. So Floyd themselves never actually released a single. They didn't, they released See Emily Play, and then they never released another single themselves until The Wall came out. So in between all those things that hit the radio, that was just disc jockeys finding stuff and saying, well, this is what's going to get run as the single.
Yeah.
I did not know that. It's fascinating.
Yeah, they refused to play that game for a long time.
Yeah. Well, their music really didn't. A lot of their music didn't fit that for a long time. You talked, Alan, about the Pink Floyd after Sid Barrett was more like your dad's Pink Floyd, and so there is a kind of a line of demarcation there. Where a lot of the early stuff wasn't real accessible, right?
Right. Yeah. Pretty much anything after Piper at the Gates of Dawn up until the Metal album. I mean, you start to get actually my favorite Pink Floyd song is Echoes. And I think that's right where you start to see, the roots develop for Dark Side of the Moon, but then they take it sort of to the next level with Dark Side of the Moon, right? You're starting to get those beautiful melodies that Gilmour was in particular great at pulling out, especially when he was working with Rick Wright, who, by the way, everybody wants to have the Gilmour and Roger Waters conversation. Rick Wright does not get nearly enough credit for the vocal lines that he has, especially in Time, for example. I am a huge fan of Rick Wright's vocals, and I think there's a lot of Pink Floyd fans that don't even know that Rick Wright was singing a lot of that stuff. So,
right.
But yeah.
Well, yeah. So there was definitely a difference there, but I think there was maybe a couple of years where Gilmour and Barrett were both in the band. I think Gilmour came in '67 and Barrett left, I think, in '69.
So a question, out of, I guess, everybody, at what point did you go and listen to the Barrett stuff? Because I came late to Floyd, and then started going back, and then first time I heard Sid Barrett, I'm like, this could be David Bowie. There's some of it. So this is, it was really fun. And I had the same experience with Fleetwood Mac, because I'm like, I like the Peter Green stuff, and because it's really, really good. And this was the same way. To start picking it up and trying to find these little things, because the radio stations aren't playing this stuff. Luckily now we have streaming and downloading, but so you can find stuff. But when did you guys pick up on Sid? Because I can't imagine any radio stations playing it.
No, I think I first picked up on Barrett when I was in high school. There was I had finished all my classes. I had 2 study periods in 10th grade, and there was a book in there that was it was just some sort of big glossary thing of bands and albums and sort of trivia and stuff like that. And so there was a huge section on Pink Floyd, and I started reading through it because, of course, it's I grew up with it because it's Dad's band, and literally Pink Floyd is Dad's favorite band, probably other than AC/DC. So I found out about the Sid Barrett thing, and I'm like, oh, I bet fucking Dad doesn't know that, right? So then it becomes it almost became a fuck you dad sort of thing, right? I found, Pink Floyd was started by this guy who's no longer in the band, and it doesn't sound anything like the version that you listen to. So I'm going to annoy you with it from here on out. And then that just became a rabbit hole. Like I collected everything Sid Barrett that I could possibly find. It didn't matter if it was like the shitty studio bootlegs from that very last session that he did solo after the 2 solo albums, like where he's just literally fucking around on guitar. I have all of that stuff. So
yeah, I don't think I really even knew anything about Sid Barrett until after I had listened to kind of Pink Floyd for the first time. This is a band that I really only encountered, honestly, probably through Kevin, and just kind of his recommendations of, hey, this is somebody you need to know. This was not something that was in my, radar or anything prior to probably the couple years that we've been doing this show.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I was not really that familiar with Sid Barrett either. We talk a lot on here about with a band or with an artist, you kind of jump in wherever you jump in, and and you can kind of ride that way forward, but there's a lot of benefit to digging back through the past. And Pink Floyd is one of those bands for me. I honestly haven't spent a lot of time on some of the earlier albums, but you can see the incredible creativity that was there with Sid Barrett, and how that really laid a foundation for the band, and what his creativity, what his leadership and presence meant to the rest of the band, even after he was gone. That traveled with them.
It took them a lot of time to find their footing after he was out of the band, and to really understand who and what they were in particular. And I think one of the interesting things about it, so Rick Wright and Roger Waters were both actually going to school to be architects, and Sid was going to school to be an artist. Right. And so you look at what they did after Dark Side of the Moon and going forward, or even Echo or Metal and going forward, and how much more structured the music became after Sid is gone. Once they start to find themselves, you can sort of see that they lean back into that to some degree, right? That idea of, how to compose a song versus, I guess, more the whim and whimsy of Sid Barrett being a little bit more on the fantastic side of things and the improvisational side of things. So,
yeah. And there's obviously still some of that there in Dark Side of the Moon and the rest of their music. But it was not to the same degree by any means.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, they it's funny. Another one of those funny things too. They got stuck on the space thing because of Sid, because of Astronomy Domine, right? And then they do Metal and they do Echoes, and it's like, well, what can we write about other than space? Let's write about being under the ocean, because that's completely different.
So just getting into a little bit about the band, Barrett founded the band in '65. They were originally called the T-Set, and there was another band called the T-Set, so they had to change their name, and they had to come up with a name pretty abruptly because they were getting ready to go on stage, and so they called themselves Pink Floyd Sound. And it was named after a couple of blues artists. One was Pink Anderson, the other was Floyd Council. It was not Floyd the Barber. So they were called Pink Floyd Sound for a little while, and then they dropped the sound. I guess it was that D-bag in the Social Network movie that had him drop the Facebook. So so great. Who was that? That was the Napster guy. Yeah. So anyway, so Pink Floyd, the lineup at the time the album came out was Roger Waters on bass and vocals, and David Gilmour on guitar and vocals, and Richard Wright on keys and vocals, and then Nick Mason on drums. So, and apparently we have a ghost, Alan. It's crazy. It's like I'm listening to a Pink Floyd album or something. So they actually started performing songs from this album live in February of '72. So more than a year before the album was released, they're doing this live, and it was. They started out calling it "The Dark Side of the Moon," a piece for assorted lunatics, and then another band called Medicine Head had already released an album called "The Dark Side of the Moon," so they had to change it, and they changed it to Eclipse, a piece for assorted lunatics, and then when the Medicine Head album flopped, they changed it back. So, but the fact that they were performing this stuff live in '72, more than a year before the album was released, that people don't do that anymore, right?
Yeah.
Pretty rare. Yeah. And if you go back and you look at Live at Pompeii, by the way, there's a ton of studio clips from the Dark Side of the Moon sessions in there.
Yeah. Yep. Live at Pompeii in and of itself is worth your time and effort.
Yes, it is.
So Dark Side of the Moon as an album, again, back in the day, it came like this, okay, in an LP, and there was a side A and a side B, and I think that was significant to this album and the way the structure was and what song went where. But all that being said, what to you are the highlights, or what stands out to you about the album, whether it's a song or certain production values of it or whatever?
Definitely those production values, and that's what I touched on earlier in particular. But then also, again, I think how much more structured they became just as songwriters. But then you also start to see, I think even at that point in time, you can start to see that there's a little bit of a division within the band still itself yet there, even with Gilmour and my brain just went blank. Roger Waters.
Yeah.
You look at Waters, obviously home demoed a lot of those songs early on, but there's a marked difference between something like, say, Time, again, led by Gilmour and Rick Wright, and something like Brain Damage. But those two songs in particular for me are my favorite two songs on the album. Brain Damage is really, really my favorite part of that entire album. And I'm not historically a Waters guy at all, although I've come to like him a little bit more in recent months with some of the stuff that he's been doing, like the lockdown sessions and stuff like that. I think is kind of interesting. But yeah.
Mike, how about you?
The thing, and I went back and saw the announcement that the album was coming up 50th. I thought, all right, I'm going to give it some listens by myself all over again, and uninterrupted, which is really hard to do, especially as you get older. It's really hard to do anything uninterrupted, but I got a chance to listen to it uninterrupted a few times, and every time it was the same thing. It's like, I'm dreaming and I'm floating. And everything is happening while I'm floating, while this is going on, and watching the story unfold. And that's the thing that kept hitting me out with the songs on it. It was different parts of a dream, almost like you're looking at your life from another, from outside, and you're seeing it unfold. You're seeing past, present, future, and it was. I don't want to say that I had an appreciation for Roger Waters, because I don't like Roger Waters. I don't like Paul McCartney, and I haven't watched the documentary, the Peter Jackson thing, because I've heard that'll change my opinion, and I kind of don't want to, because I don't like it. And Roger, the thing is that Roger Waters, it's like, okay, I get it, I understand he was behind it, but still, at the end of the day, I have a hard time. I'll give him credit, but I have a hard time giving him too much credit, because I'm. It's not that I'm David Gilmour person, but David was better singer, better musician, and maybe not a better person. Who knows? But every single time that I got a chance to listen to it, it was the same thing. It's like, I'm dreaming and I'm floating and I'm watching a life could be mine unfold from past to present, future.
Yeah. Interesting. Drew?
Yeah, actually, a lot of what Mike said was kind of my experience with it as well. This is again an album I've came to kind of in the last couple of years, but very kind of ethereal in feel and an experience both, and that's kind of something that I've found to be different with this record as far as others. There's not a lot of yeah, dreamlike, I guess, just to kind of use your words, Mike. Other records like this out there. To answer your initial question, Kevin, I think the standout or the impression one for me was the track "Time," which I think is track 4 on side A. Um,
Yep.
and that is the one where I'm like, okay, this is just. It goes from kind of an introduction to this concept to like, hey, I'm fully in this now, and this band is so tight and they're so intentional in a very weird way, very different way than anybody else. But that one was kind of the catalyst for me of like, okay, this is something I've never really experienced before. So
Yeah.
Did any of you ever go to a laser light show that played Pink Floyd? Because that, after taking the time to listen to it a few times through, because every time those commercials came on growing up, because again, the radio station ruined Floyd for me. So why would I go to a laser light show? But now I want to go to a planetarium, to a laser light show, and do this just because I have developed feelings for it after many, many years.
Yeah, they used to do those in Louisville quite a bit. Maybe 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. To me, I think you can approach this album from a number of different perspectives, but I think two primary things. You can look at it as something that's very technical and something that very much appeals to your mind, to your brain, and that's looking at the intricacies of the production values that are there, the techniques that are used, the amazing David Gilmour guitar solos. But then there's the other side of it, and all music can do this to an extent, but I think the Dark Side of the Moon probably captures this as much, or if not more than anything else. But you can get that technical side, and then you can get that emotional side where you're not listening for any of those details. You're just kind of letting the music take you wherever it takes you, and it doesn't necessarily touch your mind, but it'll touch your soul. And to me, this album captures all of that. You can approach it from however you want to, and you're going to walk away saying, this is an amazing piece of music. This is amazing work. It's amazing piece of art.
yep.
I would agree.
But that being said, the sax solo that leads into the guitar solos in Money, that's it's tough to get better than that in music, because the sax solo is fantastic, and the guitar solos that Gilmour does he kind of goes through 3 different phases with that, and it's just really Gilmour at his best, I think.
You mentioned the sax solo, but as great as those are, lively, I'll say lively and very I don't know, jazzy, soulful, in Money. The sad sax in Us and Them, it's like when that thing hits, it's like it's a downer. It's just instantly, it's like everybody, you're taking 3 steps down. It's going depressed. You're walking on a lonely street somewhere. It was, but it was great, and the last time I listened to it, I was writing down, notes from each song, but that was one. Like, it's a dark alley. You're looking back at everything that you screwed up. Sad sax plays, and it was it was fun, but it was like every time the same feelings, like, man, I screwed up.
Yeah, and I think this is where I kind of wish that that Dad hadn't listened to it as much as what he had when I was growing up, because I think that I think for me it spoils it a little bit, especially being more of a fan of that earlier period in Pink Floyd. Like, for me, I almost have to look at that entire album as almost looking at it from watching the band develop, right? To me, it's always going to come off as, and I'm not saying that this is the way that they intended it, but to me, it's always going to come off as a much more commercial piece of what they were trying to do, to where it's almost formulated, right? Like, I have a very hard time in my head separating what they had been from what they become on that album, but
Right.
they did a great job. They got a lot of attention for it, and it certainly resonates with a lot of people. So, you know, meanwhile, I listen to the most disjointed Syd Barrett song in the world and love that shit. But
I can see that. I can see that. And a lot of the Syd Barrett stuff I really like. But the impact that this album had really with the world is almost beyond compare.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
45 million records sold. It's either depending on how you count, the third or fourth highest selling album of all time. So I think behind Thriller and Whitney Houston Bodyguard or something stupid like that. Not that I don't like Whitney Houston, but come on.
What's crazy too is that, you're only 2 albums away from them reinventing themselves yet again with Animals, right?
Yeah.
They basically tore apart everything they did on Dark Side of the Moon when they did Animals, which is also an interesting, trajectory to take.
Yep. And then, well, a lot of the things that I've read and seen about it, when the band talks about the history of Pink Floyd, that Dark Side of the Moon was the most collaborative effort that they ever had. And then after that, it was really Roger Waters trying to assert his will on everything. And even though you go back and you look at interviews that were done 10, 15 years ago, Roger Waters is saying, yeah, we all worked really well together. It was the height of the band's camaraderie and creativity. And now it's the point where he's saying, well, Dark Side of the Moon was really just me. It was all mine. And because it's all mine, I'm going to come out with a reimagining of Dark Side of the Moon. There won't be any guitar solos. And okay, come on, dude.
Didn't he call them lousy guitar solos?
No. He actually just defended Gilmour over that whole thing. Gilmour, Wright, and Mason. So, and I do agree with you. Roger's a dick. And so like the Final Cut, I hate that album. I don't want anything to do with that album. I don't like any of Roger's solo stuff other than the re-recorded Pink Floyd stuff that he's doing now, ironically. But he did defend the band pretty heavily, and he did a really great interview that I saw the other day where he was talking about this whole Dark Side of the Moon thing and why he did it. And he is egotistical about it. He'll say, well, I wrote the majority of the material, whatever. And it is what it is, right? But his point of view with them was, it's a great album. You're not going to reproduce it, but I'm not doing this for them necessarily, or even for my fans. He was looking at it as, how would I interpret the message of that album now that I'm the age that I am compared to the age I was at that time? And that's when I started looking at him a little bit differently, because I'm thinking, it's really easy for him to go back and tread those waters, and he knows he's going to make money off of it because he's going to tour on it forever like he did The Wall, right? That's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to make money off of it. But meanwhile, we'll give somebody like Johnny Cash a pass if he does something of the same nature, right? And I find it interesting to see Waters tackle that in the same way that it was interesting for Gilmour to tackle, let's do a live album of Dark Side of the Moon without Waters years ago. Right? It's just different takes on that same material and how it changes over the years.
Well, the bank account starts to get a little lower. So what do? You drag Dark Side of the Moon out and do something else with it and make a few million, right?
Right. Yeah.
But you made the Johnny Cash comparison. The difference is Johnny Cash was Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash can do whatever Johnny Cash wants to do with Johnny Cash. Roger Waters was part of a band, and Roger Waters shouldn't be able to do whatever Roger Waters wants to with that band, in my opinion.
Page and Plant is my response to that.
Yeah.
Right?
That's an interesting comparison. Yeah.
It's just interesting to me, right? It was as much, and I would be all for it if Gilmour wanted to do it. If Gilmour wanted to do it, and Gilmour has made a fortune off of doing live albums of covering their material for years, as well as going back and covering even Barrett's material, right? The very guy that he replaced. And I find all that stuff interesting too. I think they're such an emotional band in the first place that it only makes sense that they would get stuck on that sort of stuff and want to reinterpret it as they get older. So
well, Waters was 30 when Dark Side of the Moon came out, and now he is 80, right? So I absolutely could see that you have a different perspective on things, but it would be, I don't know, it would be really cool to see the band reinterpret the album as opposed to just individual.
But I don't think you'll ever get that though now. I mean, Rick Wright being gone in particular, that's never going to happen. Although Nick Mason, I mean, the closest thing to Pink Floyd you're going to get, honestly, Gilmour and Waters being left out of it, the closest thing to Floyd you're going to get now is what Nick Mason is doing, which is great. It's fantastic. I don't know if you guys have listened to any of it, but it's really good stuff.
Yeah. Go just one circle back. You mentioned Page and Plant. Okay, that's one. I've heard people say, "Oh yeah, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, John Paul freaking Jones," for crying out loud.
Right.
I agree.
So I mean, which gets forgotten. But one of my issues, it's really the same issue with Rogers, is his egotism, and him want to reimagine the album. That album would not be that album without David, Nick, and Richard.
I agree.
And it wouldn't be the album without the oh god, what was her name? Carol. I want to say Sybil because it sounds more British.
Claire Torrey.
Claire, sorry.
Yeah.
Getting stuck on the Brits, but it wouldn't be the album without them. Yes, he did do the bulk of the writing, did not do most of the singing, certainly, and is not a good bass player. But what he did contribute with that, it was good. But to have, if you could have all of them released at their age, and I think Nick's got probably the most level head at his age out of any of them. Sure. He's pretty. I mean, he really seems pretty cool.
Right.
He's also the only person that has never left the band.
Well, that's true too.
Right.
But that was the thing. Okay, so Roger, he quits the band, and it's just like, well, Pink Floyd's done because I'm not in it.
Right.
And then then of course has to backtrack because he doesn't have any money. And then now he's like, oh, of course I was a fool to say that, but then still acts like the other guys weren't part of the band.
Yeah.
And I don't really care what the beef is between David and him, because I'm sure it's just two guys tired of each other's crap. But
sure.
But yeah, you couldn't have him reimagining it is fine, but there was a lot of imagining going on, with the other three guys in the band, not just Roger when that was created.
Oh, don't get me wrong, and I'm not a Roger Waters apologist. As a matter of fact,
no, I don't think you are.
For years, I hated the Roger Waters stuff. My dad burnt me the fuck out on the wall. If it were up to me when I was like 15, I would have found the master tapes for the wall and burned those motherfuckers. It'd have been erased from fucking history. It'd have been gone. I just, but you mentioned John Paul Jones, for example. So if he put together something and he reinterpreted No Quarter, I'd be fucking all about it. Right. Yeah. I'd be like, why not? I want to know what his version of that is. And so a good example of it is, and again, I don't like Waters' voice either. I'll be the first one to admit that. There's a few things I like what he does on Brain Damage. There's a couple things on the wall now I've started to come around to. He is not the musician that Gilmour is. He never was. He never will be.
Right.
He's a great lyricist. That's really what Waters does. He's a decent lyricist. But I did go back and I'd listened to the new what the hell is it called? Lockdown Sessions. And part of it was Final Cut tracks, and I ignored that. But there was a really cool, what I thought was a really cool reinterpretation of Comfortably Numb. And it's obviously it's a dark song to start with, but he took it to an even darker level on this. And I thought it's interesting to see how he's contextualized that all these years later, versus what it was. And he even purposely, you can tell when you listen to the production of it, he does drop out the Gilmore solo on it. And he doesn't try to hit the Gilmore notes in the chorus, but the way he does it is he sort of takes this restrained vocal approach, which is why I made the Johnny Cash connection, right? He knows he can't hit those notes, so he pulls it back to a lower octave.
Right.
And he does something kind of interesting, the same way that we think something like culturally Old Man Logan, right? The comic book or even the movie, right? We're all interested in what would happen to that character when it gets older.
Yeah.
This is what fucking Roger Waters turns into. He just melts into a puddle of self-pity, right? But it's interesting to see. And I think I have a different respect for what he's doing now than I certainly find what he's doing now more interesting than anything I think he's done since Pink Floyd. If that makes sense.
I will legitimately give those a listen to see. I don't know if they'll change my opinion. Because the one thing I wonder is, okay, one, is he a better musician? Or because, you had time to practice, and even John Fogerty relearned how to play guitar so he could be a good guitar player,
right?
Recognizing where he had faults. But I don't think Roger Waters thinks he has faults.
Yeah. Well,
I think you're probably right.
I never heard anybody say, I want to play bass like Roger Waters. I've heard a lot of guitarists say, I'm trying to mimic that David Gilmour sound. And it was a very distinct sound. But to Roger's credit, I mean, he had the concept for what this album could be. But to diminish the contributions, even in the slightest of any of the others, is just complete hogwash. And an example of that, and Mike, you alluded to it, is the song The Great Gig in the Sky. That has nothing to do with Roger Waters.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is Richard Wright, and that's Claire Torrey. And Claire Torrey, who was brought in to do vocals, and they said, okay, just sing something. And Wright had this beautiful piano part that he was playing, and she was just supposed to sing over the top of it. And she started out trying to just sing different words and lyrics, and they said, no, just sing. So it was just her singing, and it's not words, it's just she's just singing.
And it's beautiful,
and it's glorious. It is absolutely glorious. And
it's like a baptism. Listening to that song, it's like a baptism,
right? And some years later, she sued for writing credit and won. Well, she sued and they settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, as you might imagine. But she deserved that. I mean,
yes,
she deserved that. And that's where I talked about there being a side A and a side B to the album. That's where I think it's really significant, because Great Gig in the Sky ends side A, and it's just, where do you go from here?
Yeah.
And then you flip the album over and you get these sounds, just the change in the bowl and the cash register, and it's like, what is going on? And you've got this weird 7/4 time signature, and here you go, and it just takes you right back into a huge journey on this album. So it really good transition.
Here's another little crazy piece of deep Floyd stuff for you too. Those sounds that you're talking about, a lot of those sounds that are on that album, that was actually part of a project that they had abandoned from a few years earlier, where they were literally working with Alan Parsons, and they were trying to use various household items to make music, and they abandoned those sessions. But a lot of that stuff got recycled in the Dark Side of the Moon, and that's where those samples came from.
Yeah.
So that was an Alan Parsons project.
Yes.
Yep.
The Alan Parsons project. Yeah. Okay. Did you ever watch 30 Rock? The show 30 Rock? Okay. One of the characters on there, Pete, who was one of the producers for the show, he had a cover band called the Alan Parsons Project. So that's anyway.
So I'm gonna call my next book the Alan Bishop Project.
Yeah,
See
please
what I
do.
did there?
Please do.
You should.
Please do.
I already had a seed company named Hypnosis. I might as well just keep ripping off Pink Floyd shit.
So Kevin, as
Yeah.
a budding bass player, you're not going to say I would you say I want to start to learn how to play like Roger Waters and
I
then get
am
better?
in about a month and a half. I'm going to contact David Gilmour and say, let's get Pink Floyd back together. I'll play bass.
And you can have all the credit.
Get that Pink Floyd money.
Oh, that's not right. That's not right at all.
Oh, sure, it's fine. I mean, Gilmour made a whole Pink Floyd band out of like 20 musicians. It's okay.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So not to get too far off base of Dark Side of the Moon, but the Gilmour Pink Floyd albums, anything stand out?
Momentary
about that?
Lapse of Reason. I love that album.
Yeah.
I that was one. Yeah, I heard that it came out. I love that album when it came out. I still love that album. It had great song. Like Learning to Fly and Dogs of War, and Turning Away is haunting.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good. It's a good album, and there's no Roger. Weird, but it's good.
I see, and I like those albums, both of them. I definitely like A Momentary Lapse of Reason better than A Division Bell, although there are a few songs on the Division Bell that I really like. I'd struggle to call them a Pink Floyd album the same way I struggle to call the Final Cut a Pink Floyd album. I also feel like out of everything that they ever did, that was the most formulated thing ever. Like Gilmour's a beautiful singer. He's not a great lyricist. He relied a lot on other lyricists at the time. And to me, there's a lot of those songs where I can hear him struggling, because if you didn't write it, you probably don't really have the passion for what you're necessarily saying. And to me, I hear that when I hear those albums a lot. I think if they'd been just David Gilmour solo albums, or if they wanted to rename or something, they would have been fine.
Yeah.
Right. And they would, to me, I would maybe have a little bit more respect for it. But again, I have to kind of lump them into the Final Cut. They're not Pink Floyd albums for me.
Yeah. Roger Waters left in 85. No, he left in
81.
85.
Right. And then they lost the lawsuit. He lost the lawsuit in, I think 83 or 85, somewhere in there. Yeah.
I mean, they should have just stopped the band.
Right.
I mean, okay, we're done.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody go their separate ways and try to, pick the meat off the carcass of Pink Floyd in their own special way, and just leave it as what it was. Because I think a lot of the Pink Floyd albums that after Waters left were, and Wright and Mason basically said they were glorified Gilmour solo albums, but because it had Pink Floyd's name on it, it was going to make more money.
Right.
Do you think that would have happened though had Roger not left the way he left? Because I was like, well, screw you. We're going to keep going and we're going to do this.
That's basically what it was. Truthfully, I think that had a lot to do with it. And it was very much like the Ozzy Dio thing. Like if you go back and you look at the media at that time, before Pink Floyd decided to come out with a new album, like it was back and forth all the time. And they weren't doing anything relevant. Neither of them were. Waters' solo albums weren't doing shit.
Right.
Nobody cared. Right. But they certainly weren't getting any new Pink Floyd albums, but people were asking for them. So, but they've always kind of been a weird group of guys, even if you look back at them. And like I said, not a Roger Waters apologist, but for example, look at the way Roger treated Sid. Roger could have cared less at that time, by all accounts. Whatever happened to Sid, and it was never diagnosed. Whatever happened to Sid happened. Roger literally didn't give a shit. And I don't think Dave really gave a shit for the first couple of years because he's got a new gig. Right. But all the biographies I've ever read and all of that sort of stuff, Gilmour was personally responsible for making sure that Sid's sister was getting the royalty checks from the record company to make sure that he was taken care of.
Yeah.
So,
well, and bringing it back full circle, we started out talking a little bit about Sid and his relevance to this album, The Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, a lot of what Roger Waters was writing about was the descent into madness, and Sid was the inspiration for a lot of that.
Well, that's the old trope and the old joke about Roger Waters. He's good about writing about two things: Sid Barrett and war. That's what he's got.
Well, you're right. What you know, I guess. I don't.
But and I wonder, in Alan, you might know this too. At what point they realized how? And again, I'll say I'm early in going back listening to stuff with Sid, because to me it's a lot to decompress, because it's not a one note thing with him. It's all over the board, but in a good way. Mm-hmm. But I wonder at what point they realized how far ahead of the curve he was.
I think they kind of knew from the get-go. I mean, Sid already kind of had a little bit of a following even without playing music to begin with. They certainly realized that there's a certain cadence to the way that he would write a song, right? And it's a very like English storytelling sort of thing. And it's not something that's easy to do. It's not even something the Beatles don't even hit that stride until much later in their career. Right. And even when they do it, it oftentimes felt a little bit forced. For Sid, it wasn't like that. It was very much like an English storybook. And that would be a very hard thing to contrive, I suspect, right? And it would be a very hard thing to try to replicate. And you can see that just in between Piper at the Gates of Dawn and Saucer Full of Secrets. And even if you took the two songs that they dropped, I've argued this for a long time. There's two songs they dropped that Sid recorded for that album. He only has one full composition on there, which is Jug Band Blues, but there's a song called Vegetable Man, and there's another song, is An Old Woman with a Casket. If you drop those two songs back on there, that would have been the greatest dark psych pop album of all, probably the first psych pop album, psych pop album of all time. That would have been precursor to Adamant, The Cure, etc. And they would have been recognized for that at that point. But there's certainly a disjoint between those two albums to a pretty large degree. But I don't think it started I don't think it set in on them until they really started to write a full album of their own accord, right? And it's shit. What do we do?
What do we do?
Yeah.
What do we do and how do we do it? Right.
I do think that was part of Roger's ego. I think that's part of where it came from too, because he's the only one up to that point other than Sid that was writing any lyrics to anything. And I think at some point you look around, this is why Rick Wright supposedly got fired during the Wall, was because he wasn't contributing. You look around and you go, nobody else is fucking writing anything, right? One of us has got to fucking do something. And then he falls into his own victimhood at that point.
Right. A couple of other unique things about this album, and you could probably spend hours talking about unique things about this album, but one are the clips of the voices that are sprinkled in throughout the album. How do you see that adding to Dark Side of the Moon, and what does it contribute to it?
Well, and Brain Damage in particular, it certainly puts you into that mindset, right? Whether you're coming at it from the mindset because you've either had some issues of your own, or you're coming at the mindset of being the person looking at somebody going through that from the outside, right?
Right.
It certainly puts you in it contextualizes it in a way that the music alone, if you took that off of there, I'm not sure the music would still be great, but I'm not sure that it would hit the same way. You know, I'm not sure it would have the same effect.
Yeah.
I agree. It for me, they add to the feeling I have of I'm watching a life. I'm watching a story of a life, and there are things that are going on, it's happening, and they're not background noise either. They're relevant, like little things that are said and done and timing. It's all relevant. That's where I got a much greater appreciation of. And I don't want to say production value, but I want to say how this was built, how it was all constructed, because it was constructed in a way that there aren't that many people that can do that, you know. And I would give, if Roger is solely responsible for that, I give him credit for the construction of that. But there's not that many people that can do, you know, the concept or story album and have it there's reasons all this stuff is here. It's like,
Yeah.
like a good director putting the perfect soundtrack to a movie at certain specific times. And that's what, at some point, that's what it felt like, especially like Money. The last time that I listened to it, I was like, I could see this popping up right now where I'm watching a Wes Anderson or a Coen Brothers movie. And that's the first time I ever have thought that listening to that song.
Yeah. And what a lot of, I think, modern listeners too miss out on is this is one of those albums too. Like the mix is important. The stereo mix. This is one of the very first stereo mixes that a band was actually involved in the stereo mix, because back then it was a lot of mono and the band didn't give a shit about stereo.
Right.
But you got to sit down with a pair of those huge Pioneer headphones like I used to wear.
Yes.
And listen to this album and the way that things get moved around in the mix different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was one of my memories was there was a big hi-fi shop in Des Moines, Iowa growing up. They might even still be there, called Audio Labs. And all their commercials were to Shine On You Crazy Diamond. But anytime you go in there and you go, you go into a room and you want to hear those speakers, your choices that they have on there, it was always Pink Floyd to my memory, because why wouldn't it be? Now I'm like, well, of course it made sense. But all those guys working there, they were in their 30s, 40s, and might have been high on the marijuana at the time that they're working at the store. I had that memory going in there and listening to the speakers, and I know I heard snippets of Floyd, but anytime Money came on, it was just like, God, I hear the song again. All because of 95
bass line
ruined the song for me.
Is it funny? Right? It's funny we had the conversation Roger Waters being a shitty bass player, and then everyone hates the song Money, which is also led by bass. It's great.
I know, and that's the thing. It's got such a great groove to it. It really does. It's got a good groove to it. But I think I'm right though in the recording of this. I don't think Roger recorded the bass on this. I thought David Gilmour recorded the bass.
He may have that. I don't know.
And I could be wrong, but and that it might be something that we look up, but I can't imagine Roger being that good.
Well, I know there's a demo of there's a demo of Roger doing Money, but it's on acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
As opposed, and it's exactly as you can imagine it is. So
like Linda McCartney's background vocals.
The 1980 the 1981 re-recording of it, Gilmour played the bass.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Probably for good reason. But okay, so there's another thing in that song. Okay, the song that I didn't like because of the station, it drove me crazy.
Right.
But as I've heard that song independently, since then, and then I said going back and listening to the album, not only with that song with the great groove, to it, but listening to the words of it, I'm like, as I am getting older, it's like I feel like these lyrics.
Yes. Yes. I feel like the lyrics of Time.
Well, yeah. Wait, I mean that.
I missed the starting gun.
Yeah.
Here's a Metallica Pink Floyd thing for you. Do you think we look more favorably upon Gilmour, not just because he's a better musician and a better singer, but because we don't have a single shitty video of him like we do Lars Ulrich saying he left the fucking band?
Maybe we should put Lars and Roger together in a band.
Oh my God, yes. It'd be no rhythmics.
Yes.
No rhythmics.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I love it.
With Bob Weir.
I would actually lean into Roger Waters and Dave Mustaine. I mean, let's go full on fuck everyone.
Would they cover Dave Matthews songs?
Oh, God.
Oh yeah,
that's easy. You just take those word magnets that are on a fridge, you mix them up, and you just read it off.
Great song titles like "The Wall Mechanics."
Yeah.
Hey, a couple more things on the album. Some of the profits from this album were invested to make Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Mm-hmm.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah, Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, and then there were a few other bands that contributed invested in Monty Python
George-
to make that.
George Harrison was a big investor in him.
That's
I knew-
right. Yes.
I knew Rick Wright was apparently a large investor in cocaine and hoes, as well as boats, apparently. So,
Well, you play to your strengths, I guess.
right.
So just kind of start wrapping this up. Where does this sit, in your opinion, for music, modern music, music of the past 50 years, whatever you want to call it, rock music? Where does this album sit, do you think, culturally, and where does it sit for you as an individual?
It can't not be top 5 or 10 culturally. I mean, it has to be. There's no, especially for everything that came after it with rock and the number of even the 90. I mean, how many 90s alternative rock bands were inspired by Floyd in particular, right? Even if they weren't trying to play and sing pretty necessarily. Yeah, on the personal list, it's probably not crazy high for me, but that, again, for obvious reasons. I respect it. I think it's a cool piece of work, and I think it did awesome things. And I also think that there's something cool to be said about those 4 guys finally getting to a point where they could literally tell everyone that was still hanging on from the Sid days and talking shit like, yeah, we don't need you anymore. We have escape velocity at this point. So,
Yeah.
What do you think, Mike?
I would agree a lot with Alan on personal. It's not one of my top albums, but I've gotten a much greater appreciation after denying it for so long. I think it's rightfully on top lists as far as especially being influential. And I don't know if you'd really call it sampling, but the sound sampling that they did put in there and the way that they did it, certainly a predecessor to a lot of other things, going on. And honestly, today I was listening to De La Soul, talk about guys who sampled stuff. And it's like, and I thought about that. It's like, how much would bands like them have gotten away with being able to do that had that groundwork not already been done? And I mean, who did that much of it earlier than Pink Floyd did with this album? So, but it was in the last couple of weeks, it was a lot more fun to go back and listen to it, especially just really kind of getting getting in and out of my own head and taking the time to listen to it. And then looking at it as, okay, how does this thing affect me? And it's like, I really dug it for that. It made me think about a lot of stuff. I mean, I seriously put notes about every single song that I never thought about before. And that was a cool experience.
One more thing for me on this real quick too, is even though Dark Side is not, and anywhere on like my list, right? In the past couple of years, for some reason, maybe the past 4 or 5 years, Wish You Were Here is certainly in my top 20. I don't know what in my brain is different with those 2 albums, but there's a difference there. There's something that happened with that album that didn't happen on Dark Side for me and doesn't happen after that album for me with Pink Floyd. So
I would say, just as an impact to the culture, it's got to be one of the top 5 albums all time. I mean, everybody knows what this is. Now they think it's
not today.
Now they think it's some sort of you're a gay pride shirt. No, it's not. It's not at all.
That album cover is used for profiling now.
But I mean, I think it's to me it's the best album cover in rock music. It's because it's iconic. Everybody knows anything what that is.
That was Storm Thurgeson did that as well, right?
Yep. And man, you start listing out the album covers, the artists that he did album covers for. It goes on and on and on and on and on.
He started out as Sid Barrett's art school mate and his flatmate.
Yep.
So,
and they said, we want something simple and powerful, and that's what he brought them. And they said that he brought him like 4 or 5 different ideas, and everybody immediately gravitated to that. But I think that this album hits on a number of different levels. If you want to hit it on a surface level, you can stick with the hits and listen to the time. You can listen to Money and go away happy. But if you really want to dig into it, you can sit down and just go from track one through the end. And this is one of those albums that, maybe for the last 10 years or so, I've got a handful of albums that at least once a year I'll sit down and I'll listen to from beginning to end. And this is one of them. And when we started planning the show, I've listened to it straight through beginning to end probably 4 or 5 times. Enjoyed it every single time and tried to think about it from a different perspective every time. Sometimes, like I said, focusing in on the technical aspects of it, and sometimes just let's not think about it. Let's just kind of let it play, and it works on every level. And it's probably top 10 or top 15 for me albums. Happy 50th birthday, Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah.
There another piece of little weird Floyd history here too. I'm sure that they weren't counting on this becoming a worldwide phenomenon when it happened, right?
Right.
And they were still playing off the space thing to some degree. A lot of people don't know this is a piece of Pink Floyd music out there that even a lot of hardcore Pink Floyd fans don't know about, called Moonhead, and it was a piece that they actually did for the BBC during the Apollo landing. So this was probably, it kind of was a way of maybe even wrapping up that period in time for the band to some greater degree. So
interesting. Moonhead, is that out on YouTube or?
Yeah, you can find it on. I think you can still find the BBC broadcast on YouTube. I found it a few years ago, but I bet it's still out there. Yeah. It's just an improv piece that they did during the entire thing. So
yeah. Okay. Well, one last thing, and we can't talk about the Dark Side of the Moon without mentioning this. The whole Wizard of Oz thing is a farce, and if you were listening to this show thinking that we would focus on that, then go grab you a pour of Blanton's and watch something else. So, but it's a nice little urban legend that the band is, each and every one of them has said is hogwash, but they've probably made a few $1 million off of that urban legend as well.
But as a key representative for High Strangeness here, if you want to see something that was planned, turn on your TV, go to the History Channel, put on Ancient Aliens, mute it, and play any Pink Floyd album you fucking want to. And it'll goddamn sync up.
I do have to say, and I think we talked about this in the chat, or at least I brought it up in the chat, was one of my friends at work, he was messaged me one night, as many years ago, and he's like, hey, turn on PBS. And it was obviously during one of their drives, but they had a full concert from Brit Floyd. And I have watched more than a couple of those. And, for the two things stood out. One, for them doing note for note the album instead of, as things evolve over time, people play things different. Note for note of Pink Floyd albums, but also that it was that many musicians that took to recreate the sounds on that album. It's like 20 people on stage. That was impressive to me because, some people did, a couple of duties on there, but they sounded fantastic, and two, it just that it took that many to do that live to make that come out. So it sounded like the album. That was very impressive to me. And I think that was a testament to how much went into Pink Floyd albums in particular. But probably the next best thing, and maybe no infighting if you could watch Brit Floyd do Pink Floyd stuff.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Great stuff for sure. For sure. Also, never forget that Johnny Rotten actually knocked on Syd Barrett's apartment door and tried to hire him to produce the very first Sex Pistols album.
Wow. That's something.
Yep. That's some shit. At a time when Pink Floyd was not popular.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I mean, Pink Floyd, even when Dark Side of the Moon came out, Pink Floyd was known, but they were not huge,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Anyway, all right, guys, let's wrap this thing up. Appreciate you being on with us and enjoying the conversation about Dark Side of the Moon album, a little bit of Pink Floyd, a little bit of insulting other people as well.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, you lean into your giftings. So
Yes.
As we're
30
wrapping,
bottles. 30 bottles.
30 bottles. Yeah,
27.
this is a misprint, but right here it's a misprint. It says 40. I don't believe it.
Next time you see one that says 27.5, 28.5, you're going to know why.
I want an album or a bottle that's labeled pie.
We'll work on that Alan Bishop project label tomorrow.
Yes. Awesome. All right, Alan Bishop Project. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media.
You can find me. I don't have my Facebook or my Instagram memorized, but you can check out Distillers Talk Podcast wherever you get podcasts. One Piece of Time Distilling Institute on YouTube, and if you have Ghosts, you have everything wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah. You're the Alchemist Cabinet on Instagram, by the way.
Yeah, I don't have any of that memorized.
Yeah.
I should. That one's easy.
That's not that. Yeah, that was pretty easy. That was
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, Mike. How about you, buddy?
Easiest and best place is Monday nights, 8 p.m. Central on YouTube and Facebook at My Whiskey Den, the original My Whiskey Den.
The original, the new originals.
Yes.
That recipe's locked away in a safe somewhere.
Bourbon Turntable. We're on the YouTube if you want to watch us. And who wouldn't want to watch? Look at these guys. Look at these handsome devils. who wouldn't want to watch this?
Yeah.
If you just want to listen to it and miss that visual experience, we are on your favorite podcast platforms, as long as it's Apple or Spotify or Google. We have a YouTube, Facebook page that's where we post all of our shows. We have a Facebook group where you can go on. You can comment about what you're drinking. You can comment about what you're listening to. We'd love to hear from you there. And we just have a good time here. I think we've had a good time here tonight.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Drinking some unusual whiskeys to talk about an unusual album.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh, real quick too, guys. One thing I forgot about with the whole Pink Floyd thing. I'll shut my mouth after this. It just popped in there. What got me on the Waters thing recently, other than that Comfortably Numb thing? So he was on Joe Rogan's show, and it was a fascinating interview. Like when I saw it pop up, I'm like, and I listened to it, and it was pretty damn good.
Yep.
Honestly.
No, he's always interesting to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
I usually just come away with thinking, yeah, that was interesting, but this guy's a jackass.
Well, it was the first time that I'd ever heard him be sensitive about the Sid Barrett topic on that interview. I guess is kind of maybe what got my attention. So,
well, all right. So, on behalf of Drew, who had to check out a little bit early, and Alan and Mike and myself, thank you for watching. Until next time, cheers, love, and Freebird. Night, everybody.